Mrs. Huti Watson's fourth topic, and the final talk of the summer school, is Love is the Secret.
Tēnā tātou e hoa mā, alawa pā, brothers and sisters across Aotearoa once again, tēnā koutou katoa. Again, if I mention anything in these talks in relation to the plan or the community building context, they're only thoughts to consider anew if appropriate. We don't want to interfere in what's happening at the grassroots and the very fledgling community building efforts. So these are just some contributions to your kete. Nāku te raurau, nau te raurau, ka ora ai te iwi. The title of the talk is Love is the Secret, welcoming Māori into the faith. We've talked a little bit about welcomes already, but I want to relate to you a story about a welcome that I received when I first went to Central Australia to visit a clan from the Amajara tribe. I was with a group of Bahá'ís and several Māori Bahá'ís as well. And when we arrived, we saw the ladies hurry out of the women's centre with their souvenirs. They'd made these for visiting tourists. And we quickly realised that this wasn't going to be a spiritual event at all. It was probably going to end up as a haggling event if we weren't quick about it. So we initiated our cultural protocols to show that we were coming with a different spirit. And when they heard the karanga, they stopped, they looked at each other, and they hurried back into the centre. And then they shortly came out again with their dancing implements, and they began their traditional welcome dance. And I'll never ever forget that ceremony, because it was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life. The cultural exchange completely changed the tone and spirit of the meeting. It brought about a deep sense of connection and understanding, and it established an immediate rapport. And I became steadfast friends with these women over the years. The implements that they brought out, by the way, they ended up giving as gifts instead of selling to us as if we were tourists. On day 2 of summer school talks, we discussed the pōhiri process, the formal welcome onto the marae, and the very dignified process that brings together two groups of people who may not have previously met, strangers to each other. And I ask you to picture the moment when someone visits your home. You see them walking up the garden path, they knock on the door, you open it, you're smiling, and you welcome them in, and you shower them with hospitality. The pōhiri process is exactly the same thing. It's just different. And I think it's important to stop and think about the quality of our interactions with people when we first meet, and how we call that spirit to our gatherings, so that in every circumstance we're sensitive about our behaviours and our words. The Master Abdul Baha is the standard bearer and the exemplar of all that it is to be Baha'i. And I share with you an account of Abdul Baha's particular style of welcome. So we've talked about the Māori welcome. Now we're going to talk about Abdul Baha's welcome. And this is from Daily Lessons Received at Aka by Helen Guru. He came at once, the joyous ring of his voice reaching us even before we saw him, calling, "Welcome, welcome, I'm glad you are here," and adding to his warm, strong hand clasp the greater welcome of his wonderful eyes and heavenly smile. "Welcome, welcome, you are very welcome. Then, are you happy?" Which was repeated 3 times. Now, I really like this 3 times thing. It's a Māori thing. We do it on the marae all the time, and you'll probably know a little bit about that. And it goes on, "Now, as I looked into the eyes of Abdul Baha, I saw they had changed, and a wondrous light seemed to pour out. It was the light of love, and I felt relieved and very much happier. Therefore be thou happy that, praise be to God, thou hast an illumined heart, a living spirit, and art vivified with merciful breath. Abdul Baha walked into the room. His arms were outstretched. His dear face was glorified. "Welcome," he cried to Grace. "Welcome to the kingdom." And he held her close, embracing her deeply. "You are very welcome, and it makes me happy to see you here." And Baha'i World Faith, O friend, be set aglow with the fire of the love of God, so that the hearts of the people will become enlightened by the light of thy love. From these examples, we can see that Abdul Baha was kind and loving to every soul, and he welcomed all into his presence. He was constantly showering the love and light of God on friend and stranger alike, seeking always a condition of happiness, relieving the burdened soul and uplifting the spirit. All this was done in a selfless and humbled act of servitude. And then he tells us, "Another commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, even as I love you. Great mercy and blessings are promised to the people of your land, but on one condition, that their hearts be filled with the fire of love, that they live in perfect kindness and harmony like one soul in different bodies. If they fail in this condition, the great blessings will be deferred. Never forget this. Look at one another with the eye of perfection. Look at me, follow me, be as I am. Take no thought for yourselves or your lives, whether you eat or whether you sleep, whether you are comfortable, whether ye are well or ill, whether ye are with friends or foes, whether you receive praise or blame. For all of these things you must not care at all. Look at me and be as I am. You must die to yourselves and to the world. So shall ye be born again and enter the kingdom of heaven. Behold how a candle gives its light. It weeps its life away drop by drop to give forth its flame of light. Against the backdrop of this most great love, we can see that the greater the love, the greater the attraction." From Abdul Baha, again from Paris Talks, "The love which exists between the hearts of the believers is prompted by the ideal of the unity of spirits. This love is attained through the knowledge of God, so that men see the divine love reflected in the heart. Each sees in the other the beauty of God reflected in the soul, and finding this point of similarity, they are attracted to one another in love. This love will make all men the waves of one sea. This love will make them all the stars of one heaven and the fruits of one tree. This love will bring the realization of true accord, the foundation of real unity. This is the standard that has been set, and we have before us the example of the Master showing the way." The National Spiritual Assembly, in their letter of 3rd of July, referred to an excerpt from the House of Justice writing about the engagement of the Baha'i community with indigenous populations. The Baha'i community is engaging with indigenous populations and other groups of people across the globe in an unfolding discourse centered on spiritual and social transformation. The Training Institute has proven to be a most effective instrument in this process, a process that has far-reaching implications. It carries with it an invitation to a higher consciousness of the purpose for which every individual human being was created. It implies a fundamental reorienting of a soul towards its creator, an awakening to the personal and social implications of the Guardian's statement that Baha'u'llah's revelation is calling into being a new race of men, a wholehearted dedication of one's talents and abilities to the attainment of that day when the Blessed Beauty assures us all men shall be regarded as one soul. The efflorescence of those talents and abilities and their channeling into specific acts of service is a goal that the Training Institute aspires to achieve. And it's clear that in recent times, there's been a steady flow of Māori coming into the cause through the community building processes, and in particular, the Training Institute. And the House of Justice reaffirms the efficacy of the Training Institute among Indigenous populations in the following. The implications at the level of society are no less profound than those at the individual level. All men, Baha'u'llah asserts, have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. This, rather than the mere accumulation of religious converts, is the elevated goal to which all our efforts in the teaching field are directed. The central purpose of the Training Institute process is to raise up human resources who can contribute to this objective. In countless instances, including amongst Indigenous populations, participants of the Institute process, whether veteran Baha'is or those recently acquainted with the faith, have testified to the efficacy of the Institute courses in opening their eyes to both a new conception of spiritual reality and its implications for the creation of a new civilization, as well as empowering them to become an agent of the renewal society must undergo. The House of Justice is aware that there are numerous souls among the Māori population who not only have the capacity to embrace this vision, but who are ready and eager to work towards its realisation. And the National Assembly has articulated that vision further when it says that it is heartened that there are not only solid community building activities amongst Māori families and young people in smaller settings and urban centres around the country, but there are also initiatives across clusters in certain parts of the country where the Māori Friends are engaged in enterprising measures to take charge of their own spiritual and material development within the framework of the plan, and more importantly, are doing so in close and loving consultation with the institutions of the faith. The community building processes are taking hold with vigour, and inevitably more and more Māori will enter the Bahá'í community in the immediate future as protagonists, working shoulder to shoulder with their compatriots within the cause. And this is the context within which we are thinking about this idea of the honouring of tangata whenua, with coherence, with that special measure of love mentioned by the Guardian in relation to Indigenous peoples, and thinking about what a discrimination in favour of the minority might look like within the framework. What does encouraging minorities look like? And in this particular context, iwi Māori. The House of Justice says, in the affairs of the Baha'i community, Baha'is are learning to transcend traditional barriers that divide people in the wider society. Shoghi Effendi explained that every organised community enlisted under the banner of Baha'u'llah should feel it to be its first and inescapable obligation to nurture, encourage and safeguard every minority belonging to any faith, race, class or nation within it. One example is the way in which all minorities are encouraged in their participation. If any discrimination is at all to be tolerated, Shoghi Effendi has for instance stated, when discussing the corrosive effects of prejudice, it should be a discrimination not against, but rather in favour of the minority, be it racial or otherwise. The practice of Baha'i elections is symbolic of this commitment to encouraging minorities. When a Thai vote arises and one of those involved belongs to a minority group in that society, that person is unhesitatingly accorded the priority without the necessity of another vote to break the tie. Over the years, we've all heard many times, no doubt, the references that were made in several letters written on behalf of the Guardian about bringing large numbers of Māori into the faith. And it might be time to do so again, and to think about the points the Guardian makes in relation to the framework of the plan. On June 16, 1954, in a letter to the National Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia and New Zealand, on behalf of the Guardian, it reads, "He attaches great importance to teaching the Aboriginal Australians and also in converting more Māori to the faith, and hopes that the Baha'is will devote some attention to contacting both of these minority groups. In another letter in April of 1957, to lead an unprecedented impetus to the conversion of the Māoris and to ensure their active participation in the conduct of Bahá'í administrative institutions. And again, as you formulate your plans and carry them out for the work entrusted to you during the next 6 years, he wishes you to particularly bear in mind the need of teaching the Māori. These original discoverers of New Zealand are of a very fine race, and they are a people admired for their noble qualities, and special effort should be made, not only to contact the Māori in the cities and draw them into the faith, but to go to their towns and live amongst them, and establish assemblies in which at least the majority of the believers will be Māori, if not all. This would be indeed a worthy achievement. Drawing out the main points the Guardian has made here that we might want to think about in the light of the current work being undertaken. How might we devote attention to contacting Māori? What does an unprecedented impetus to the conversion of the Māori look like in this current reality? What might active participation in the conduct of Bahá'í administrative institutions for more Māori look like? One interesting aspect of this passage is where the Guardian says, go to their towns and live amongst them, and establish assemblies in which at least the majority of the believers will be Māori, if not all. I believe that the very first majority Māori local assembly was in the Hawke's Bay in the 80s, and that was a newly formed assembly. The very first elected local assembly with a majority of Māori members was in the Far North District a little bit later on. However, and here's the thing, let's not ignore that there may remain challenges when individuals come into contact with the new friends in our communities in various ways, which can sometimes prove alienating and unintentionally hurt feelings. This is because we are all on a pathway of learning, and as much as we strive to gradually bring our lives into accordance with the teachings, in many ways our communities are still reflective of the society around us. You can see from the previous talks over the last 3 days that Māori in general are very engaged in preserving their culture. This is a reality of Aotearoa, and Baha'u'llah asks us to be concerned with the exigencies of the age in which we live. Keeping in mind the great example of Abdul Baha, would we tell new friends in the cause that they must give up their cultural norms? Would we tell them that they should do this or not do that? Do we tell them that now we're all one and they don't need to express being Māori or Samoan or any other ethnicity? Do we tell people how they should be? In Bahá'í World Faith, the most important feat in this day is harmony and agreement. No soul must interfere with another, and no one must find fault with the rest. The friends must at all times bear in mind that they are, in a way, like soldiers under attack. The world is at present in an exceedingly dark condition spiritually. Hatred and prejudice of every sort are literally tearing it to pieces. We, on the other hand, are the custodians of the opposite forces, the forces of love, of unity, of peace and integration, and we must continually be on our guard, whether as individuals or as an assembly or community, lest through us these destructive, negative forces enter into our midst. In other words, we must beware lest the darkness of society become reflected in our acts and attitudes, perhaps all unconsciously. Love for each other, the deep sense that we are a new organism, the dawn breakers of a new world order, must constantly animate our Bahá'í lives, and we must pray to be protected from the contamination of society, which is so diseased with prejudice. He, like the Master before him, is so anxious to see the believers united in serving the faith. If between the friends true love, based on the love of God, could become manifest, the cause would spread very rapidly. Love is the standard which must govern the conduct of one believer towards another. The administrative order does not change this, but unfortunately, sometimes the friends confuse the two and try to be a whole spiritual assembly to each other, with the discipline and justice and impartiality that body must show, instead of being forgiving, loving, and patient to each other as individuals. Let's also take a moment to think about our community spaces. Aotearoa has a particular way of being in Bahá'í gatherings. In Vanuatu, for example, gatherings are joyous, full of song, everyone is clapping and singing. Anyway, that's what I remember from years ago. In Aotearoa, many gatherings can be quite somber, loving, but somber. Within the parameters of the community building processes and administrative functioning, are there spaces being created for the cultural traditions and expressions of others to be reflected in our gatherings? And how do we make room for others to feel that they're able to express who they are? The following passage helps us to go even deeper in our contemplation. From Advent of Divine Justice, Shoghi Effendi. Let the white make a supreme effort in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous and informal association with them of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow healing wounds. Let the Negroes, through a corresponding effort on their part, show by every means in their power the warmth of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think that such a problem can either easily or immediately be resolved. Let neither think that they can wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken and the favourable circumstances created by agencies that stand outside of the orbit of their faith. Let neither think that anything short of genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort can succeed in blotting out the stain which this patent evil has left on the fair name of their common country. Let them rather believe and be firmly convinced that on their mutual understanding, their amity and sustained cooperation must depend more than on any other force or organisation operating outside the circle of their faith. The deflection of that dangerous course so greatly feared by Abdu'l-Baha, and the materialization of the hopes he cherished for their joint contribution to the fulfillment of that country's glorious destiny. Let's look at the instructions that are in that passage for us. I've made a list. For the white races, abandon once and for all their usually inherent and at times subconscious sense of superiority. How does one do that? Patronizing attitude, to persuade them through their intimate, spontaneous and informal association, genuineness of their friendship, sincerity of their intentions. And the black or dark races, they must show the warmth of their response, readiness to forget the past, in other words, forgiveness, and to wipe out every trace of suspicion. If we look at what's happening in the world today, I sometimes wonder how it is that people will feel about being asked to forgive. It's such a hard thing to do. But this is what is being asked of us. And the stipulations there. Let neither think that the solution of so vast a problem is a matter that exclusively concerns the other. Let neither think the problem can be easily or immediately be resolved. Is there scope to do this within the community building efforts, projects and activities for social action, or discourses in society? Let neither think that they can wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken, so it means we have to address it ourselves. Not allowed to wait for the favourable circumstances created or for anyone else to come to their rescue. This is the work that we must do. And it tells us the qualities that we need to develop. Genuine love, extreme patience, true humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort. These are not easy tasks. They are really difficult. But I think these are important things to think about in the context of creating more loving communities when we're wanting to be more understanding about other worldviews. We want to appreciate the wholesome elements of other people's cultures. We want to understand and empathize with those seeking justice and behave in a loving way that shows how we honor those who enter into our midst. I'm going to tell you a short story that relates to this issue. There was a Bahá'í community who had experienced some difficulties in relation to unconscious bias or racial disunity in some ways. Sometimes things had been said unintentionally about culture that upset a seeker. A meeting was called, it was actually a hui, and it was called to promote unity for the community. And using tikanga Māori processes, the community were able to express their views. One believer, I'll call her number one, said she was a third-generation Bahá'í and didn't see differences. She said, "I see us all as one." Another Bahá'í said, when you say we're all one, to me it means I have to become like you and then we'll be one. And I don't want to. I want to be who I am. This was a beautiful way of consulting openly and lovingly about a critical issue. Over the subsequent months, it was noted that Bahá'í number one had attended tikanga classes, had taken on herself the responsibility of learning about things Māori, and quietly supported Māori initiatives, but she said very little about it. This to me is an important expression of love, the taking of responsibility for oneself and having the desire to learn, to listen to others, and to be open to change. In this story, I can see, as the Guardian has mentioned, genuine love, patience, humility, consummate tact, sound initiative, mature wisdom, and deliberate, persistent, and prayerful effort. This is a beautiful example of honouring tangata whenua. And the following passage from the House of Justice 25th of November letter to an individual touches on the many facets of how this believer discharged her responsibilities in this way. When society is in such difficulty and distress, the responsibilities of the Baha'is to make a constructive contribution to human affairs becomes more pronounced. This is a moment when distinct but interrelated lines of action converge upon a single point, when the call to service rings aloud. The individual, the community, and the institutions of the faith, inseparable protagonists in the advancement of civilization, are in a position to demonstrate the distinctive features of the Baha'i way of life, characterized by increased maturity in the discharge of their responsibilities and in their relationships with each other. They are summoned to a fuller expression of the faith's society-building powers. Agencies and projects dedicated to social action may have to adapt their approaches in order to meet expanded needs and efforts to do this are sure to infuse ongoing programs with deeper meaning and purpose. Further, Bahá'í contributions to discourses newly prevalent in society are generating heightened interest, and there is a responsibility to be discharged here too. At a time when the urgency of attaining higher levels of unity, founded on the incontestable truth of humanity's oneness, is becoming apparent to larger and larger numbers. Society stands in need of clear voices that can articulate the spiritual principles that underlie such an aspiration. You are, of course, ever conscious that your responsibilities reach beyond those of administering the affairs of your community and channeling its energies towards the fulfillment of noble goals. You seek to raise awareness of those spiritual forces that are available to every confirmed believer and which must be marshalled at the hour of need. It is these forces which endow the community with resilience, ensure its integrity, and keep it focused on the divine mission to serve humanity and elevate its vision of the future. Now, looking to draw together the threads that we've been talking about, perhaps they can be encapsulated in the words of the House of Justice in its message to the Baha'is of the world. Whether through deeds or words, the merit of your every contribution to social well-being lies first in your resolute commitment to discover that precious point of unity where contrasting perspectives overlap and around which contending peoples can coalesce. In the encounter between Tangata Whenua and others who make up the Bahá'í community of Aotearoa, we are engaged in learning from our contrasting perspectives culturally in order to find that precious point of unity, which turns contention into cooperation. In this process, we're developing a body of knowledge that can benefit our whole society. As the document in Social Action puts it, it is important to realise that the application and propagation of existing knowledge is invariably accompanied by the generation of new knowledge, much of which takes the form of insights acquired through experience. One thing required of us is to develop a lively appreciation of the riches inherent in cultural traditions other than those that we were born into. There is a human tendency to believe that the ways that we've gotten used to are the normal and natural ways. And the House of Justice again gives pause for thought. The older believers must be careful to distinguish between those matters which are principles of the faith and those which may merely be traditional Spanish or Persian attitudes. As you are undoubtedly aware, pioneers have sometimes caused unnecessary complications by insisting that the new believers in a country adopt practices which turn out to have nothing to do with the faith, but are merely norms of behaviour from the pioneer's own homeland. In uniting the peoples of the world in the Bahá'í community, we must establish uniformity in essentials, but must permit diversity in secondary matters. And another quotation highlighting the importance of acquiring a deeper knowledge of other cultures is this: "You have in your midst two groups of Polynesians which should continue to receive special attention, namely the Māori and the recent immigrants from the Pacific Islands. In reaching them with the teachings, the friends are encouraged to manifest their understanding of Polynesian culture, traditions, and unique qualities, as well as mirror forth in their manifold aspects the splendour of those eternal principles proclaimed by Baha'u'llah." So we might briefly consider some particular areas of culture where it would be most fruitful for believers of differing backgrounds to become more aware of. And of course, I'm reiterating some of this from my second talk. Because the most important of all is language. As the House has said, Indigenous populations must have the fundamental right to develop and take pride in their identity, culture, and language. And again, language is the expression of the spirit of a people. Facility in one's native language can act as a stabilizing influence in society. While the cultural expression which seeks to obliterate minority languages can have a deracinating and demoralising effect that will be very difficult to correct. And I've never ever seen that word deracinating anywhere else in the world. It's not even on Google. So it's a very interesting word. I mean, you can get the meaning of it, but it's very interesting how it's been used in that context. Echoing such a theme, one writer has commented the most important aspect of tohungatanga is te reo Māori, the Māori language. The Māori language is not just the arrangement of kupu, or words. It's not just the arrangement of grammatical sentence structures and idioms, as it's seen in these contemporary times. Rather, the true reo of the ancestors is about the vibrations that bring about a deeper understanding and meaning to life. No te atua taku reo. Māori believe that the language was handed down to them by God. In this light, a highly significant practical step that believers in Aotearoa can take for honouring tangata whenua is to imbibe a little bit of te reo. And we've touched on quite a few words in te reo throughout the course of these talks, and for most of it I have provided translations for those who don't have any experience in te reo. But this could be a practical step towards that precious point of unity where contrasting perspectives overlap. And we go back again to the theme of love. What greater love is there amongst humans than the love that exists between the lovers of God? The love that exists between the hearts of believers is prompted by the ideal of the unity of spirits, Abdul Bahá'í says. This love is attained through the knowledge of God, so that men see the divine love reflected in the heart. Each sees in the other the beauty of God reflected in the soul, and finding this point of similarity, they are attracted to one another in love. So this is this overlapping perspective, those points of unity that we can find. In the House of Justice, ultimately, the power to transform the world is effected by love. Love originating from the relationship with the divine. Love ablaze among members of a community. Love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the Word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems, so that they can gradually take on a new form in keeping with the requirements of humanity's age of maturity. You are channels for this divine love. Let it flow through you to all who cross your path. Infuse it into every neighbourhood and social space in which you move to build capacity to canalise the society-building power of Baha'u'llah's revelation. There can be no rest until the destined outcome is achieved, and that was in the letter of July this year to the Baha'is of the United States. We've captured something of the foundation of the original Māori religion in order to understand more of the psyche of iwi Māori. We've discussed something of the wholesome elements of Māori culture and undertaken an analysis of the pōheri so that we might appreciate the deeply spiritual nature of it and how the process is underpinned by spiritual principles of the faith. And we've gone into some depth about the origins of the injustices so keenly felt by many Māori today. And we now look to the solution that will effectively open the door to the Māori community. And that is only one thing alone, dear friends, and that's love. These talks have only been a minor capturing of the broad-ranging issues affecting Māoridom today. But hopefully, through them, it has become clearer that honouring tangata whenua is an imperative that can infuse all the work we are doing in the framework of the plan for the transformation of neighbourhoods, cities, and the life of our nation as part of the glorious movement towards the world order of Baha'u'llah. It's been an honour to serve you in this capacity, friends. Mā te atua tātou e manaaki, e tiaki, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. And I leave you with the soul-stirring passage from Abdul Bahá'í. Know thou of a certainty that love is the secret of God's holy dispensation, the manifestation of the all-merciful, the fountain of spiritual outpourings. Love is heaven's kindly light, the Holy Spirit's eternal breath that vivifieth the human soul. Love is the cause of God's revelation unto man, the vital bond inherent in accordance with the divine creation and the realities of things. Love is the one means that ensureth true felicity in this world and the next. Love is the light that guideth in darkness, the living link that uniteth God with man, that assureth the progress of every illumined soul. Love is the most great law that ruleth this mighty and heavenly cycle, the unique power that bindeth together the diverse elements of this material world, the supreme magnetic force that directeth the movements of the spheres and the celestial realms. Love revealeth with unfailing and limitless power the mysteries latent in the universe. Love is the spirit of life unto the adorned body of mankind, the establisher of true civilization in this mortal world, and the shedder of imperishable glory upon every high-aiming race and nation. Pāmai te aroha I te ate, kia whai ngā takahanga. E maru ai ta whiti, te tihi o pokea maru. Kei runga rawara manga mā te rā, ki te rangi tui honei. Nāku nā te whenua inuku, I te waha o rere kohu. Hei maru mo te tini, kia ai o te nohoe. Kia ora tātou.